you can walk into AIPAD and see the entire history of photography, from the first plates to things that were taken yesterday.
We don't just want to sell photographs. We want to educate the public, the interested public, the general public, about photography.
You just heard Lydia Melamed Johnson, the Executive Director of AIPAD, and Martijn van Pieterson, President of AIPAD, talking about their flagship art fair, the Photography Show, presented by AIPAD. So what is AIPAD? The Association of International Photography Art Dealers is a member organisation of galleries and photography dealers dedicated to creating and maintaining high standards in the business of exhibiting, buying and selling photographs as art. This episode of Subtext Discourse Art World podcast is the first of 7 as part of a collaboration with AIPAD in the lead up to the 2025 edition of the Photography Show, the oldest and longest running art fair for photography, which takes place from the 23rd until the 27th of April at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. Throughout April, I'll be speaking with AIPAD members about the history of the organisation, the fair itself, and how the market for photography has changed since the founding of AIPAD in 1979. My guests today are the aforementioned Lydia Melamed Johnson and Martijn van Pieterson. In this episode, we talk about AIPAD Today, in particular how the association navigated COVID, what new initiatives have come out of the management restructure, and what we can expect to see at the 2025 edition of their flagship art fair, the Photography Show, presented by AIPAD. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the program. You're listening to Subtext and Discourse Art World podcast, highlighting unique perspectives on contemporary art and photography. I'm your host, Michael Dooney. Now, without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. So, Lydia Melamed Johnson and Martijn van Pieterson, thank you for both joining me on the podcast across 3 different, have been time zones, are we in? We're in Perth and in Antwerp and in New York, so we're proper international now. I thought before we get into today's topic, which is current AIPAD and what's happening at the fair this year, maybe we can start with how you both got into photography, because when I was looking at both of your histories, you started collecting together with your partners before you were involved with photography professionally. Whoever would like to go first.
Lydia, you go first.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Well, Michael, thank you so much for having us today. Obviously, this is a project you and I have been talking about for a while, and so it's really exciting to be collaborating with you on this podcast in the lead up to the show, and I'm excited to talk all things AIPAD of today. But yes, photography for me did absolutely begin as a collecting field, part of kind of my personal lore that I grew up with a Richard Barnes Unabomber cabin photo outside my bedroom door in Oakland, California. My mother was a collector too, and so very early on, I learned the power of photography and its ability to inspire and make you question things and make you question imagery and all of that. And then when my husband, Paul, and I started our own collection, obviously we were young professionals, and photography has a really accessible entry point for you. And it was a great place for us to start. And we've fallen in love with a few things. One of our first purchases was actually from Martijn in 2022. We bought a Paul Cupido that I'm looking at now. And yeah, so it's just grown from there. And now we really enjoy every year we try to buy something at the fair when everything's under one roof. And yeah, that was my entry point. And so when Perry Photo came calling, it was a nice way to move into a different niche of the art world, but one that I already had a deep passion for.
Yeah, because your background was in Old Masters, wasn't it?
Yep. Yeah, very different.
Crazy.
Yeah, similarly to Lydia, I started my business when I was a collector, basically. So my wife and I, Anne-Marie, we've been collecting contemporary and modern art for a long time. And at some stage, Anne-Marie got into photography, as in making photographs. She went to a school in Amsterdam. And we felt that, at that point in time, we really need to start looking at photography as a collectible as well. I got my first photograph for my birthday. I think it was in 2007 or something like that, which was a Désiré Delron, Dutch artist. And from then, we moved into various parts of photography, finally settling on Japanese photography, which formed the basis of our gallery.
How did you settle on Japanese photography? Or what is it, maybe briefly you can say about Japanese photography that sets it apart?
Well, basically, you have to know that we already collected Japanese woodblock prints for a long time, since the early, the late 90s, actually. So we already had a sort of a feeling, a sensibility for Japanese aesthetics. But we didn't really, when we collected photography, we didn't really think about Japanese photography per se. But then we walked into an exhibition at the Tate Modern, which was William Klein and Daido Moriyama. We completely fell in love with Daido Moriyama's work and, the versatility of this man, the incredible experiments that he does. And yeah, we were completely blown away. And after that, we immediately started investigating Japanese photography. We got in touch with his gallery in Japan. We actually bought a piece from the show in the Tate Modern. And we started really looking into who influenced him, who did he influence, and from then it sort of spiraled completely out of control, basically.
Yeah, wow. Cool. So the topic of today's episode is current AIPAD. So AIPAD is the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. Every year since 1979, there is the Photography Show presented by AIPAD. So there's a photography art fair, but then there's also an organization. How do the two interact? Did one come before the other one? They support one another? Like, how does the whole organism function?
Well, I mean, I think it is a community of people, right? That's the starting point of AIPAD. It's basically like-minded people that are in the same field who wanted to do something together. This is all well before my time, well before Lydia's time. We were speaking to some old dogs in the coming podcasts, so you get the whole story from them. But for AIPAD is a community of people. They organize a number of things for themselves as well as for the wider audience of photography, both in the US as well as globally. And one of those things that is also organized on an annual basis is a fair. So it's not just a fair. This is why it's called the Photography Show by AIPAD. AIPAD is sort of the starting point. The Photography Show is one of the activities that it does.
And I think other organizations like ours, that if you are more new to the photography community and you might not be as familiar with AIPAD, you might know IFPDA, which is the International Fine Print Art Dealers. There's ADAA, which is the Art Dealers Association of America. There's NADA, which is the New Art Dealers Association. So there's many communities within the art world that have been created kind of by dealers to support themselves. And of course, there's also the Art Advisors Association, art professionals. There's many of these. And I think when we look to our colleagues in other organizations, IFPDA, ADAA, and NADA are very similar to us in that they all do similarly host a flagship event once a year.
Okay.
I guess NADA has more than one. So that might be a way for people who might be more familiar with other areas of the art world to understand what this community is. However, what I would say is most special about AIPAD is the sense of community and collegiality, if I can use that word, in this community. It's really incredible to see, having worked in other parts of the art world, to come into AIPAD and even when I was at Perry Photo before, the amount of affection and friendship and knowledge sharing and connoisseurship that lives within these dealers within AIPAD is really incredible, and something that I did not expect to see in what can often be a very cutthroat world and industry. And so AIPAD is really special in that. And I hope that many of your listeners will listen to all of the episodes we're collaborating with you on. I think it will be really interesting to hear about the founding of AIPAD, because it very much comes into being during a time when the market for fine art photography is being built. And many of the people you'll talk to were part of that. And it's continued to grow out of that, where you're supporting each other, where you're working together to promote the most incredible photography that the world has ever seen. And that's something that has been really special in at least my time at AIPAD in the last 3 years to see and to understand. And something that, as I've grown in this leadership role within AIPAD, something that I've leaned on continuously. It's something that if we're working on the fair and we need to put together the talks program and I need to figure out who's the best people to speak on something, I know I can call any of my galleries and they'll brainstorm with me, they'll give me the time, and they just want to make sure that this event is successful and that their colleagues are successful. The rising tide lifts all boats really comes to mind almost daily with my interactions with our gallery. So that's been really special and something that I would say, in my opinion, sets AIPAD apart from many of its colleagues, and something that I'm incredibly proud to be a part of.
Yeah, I've certainly noticed that with the handful of members that I've spoken to, like in the lead up to these recordings, and even just seeing in the email chains, like it does feel like everybody's very familiar with each other and it is very supportive. As an organization, how does AIPAD serve the member galleries? Like, what does it provide?
Do you want me to take that one, or you want to speak as a gallerist?
Well, I mean, I'll list a few things. So first of all, basically the fair, which is an important event every year. It is the gateway to the photography market in the US, but it is also an international event where many people from around the world come to see, the best in photography. One thing, when you become a member, I haven't been a member for a very long time, just since 2018, as you said. But when you become a member, you immediately get sort of adopted within the community, and people are reaching out to you. But we also have a forum where people are asking questions to each other about simple things like framing or shipping or whatever, but also certain artworks that people are looking for, or people have, or a show that people are interested in doing. So there's a whole conversation that goes on between the entirety of the community, at all times. Then, as you already alluded to, we have this talks program, which is a very fundamental part of what AIPAD does. We don't just want to sell photographs. We want to educate the public, the interested public, the general public, about photography, and not just about what photography is now, but the whole history of photography is important for us. So we organize regular talks, both virtual as well as in person, throughout the year, but also particularly in the run-up to the fair and at the fair, which is a really important aspect, benefiting all our members as well, because the more people we educate, we enthuse for the medium, the better it will be for the market as a whole. We also negotiate certain benefits for our members with suppliers. So there's a whole host of things that we do. I don't know, Lydia, if you have any additional things that I...
No, I think that those are kind of the big pieces. Those are the big pillars of membership in AIPAD. One is, I've done podcasts last year, and they would ask me kind of about AIPAD, and I knew I needed to open a thesaurus and find a different word for community, because I use it way too much. But as Martijn says, you do get welcomed into this group, this network. We'll use some other words, right? But you are immediately welcomed into this network. And I think with that comes the sense of mentorship and also the sense of resource. So Martijn spoke about the forum, which is, I think, one of the more not guarded, but more closely held secrets of AIPAD, is that there is this really fantastic forum where you can go to your fellow dealers and ask questions, big and small. In the preparation for the fair, it's been lighting up with who's a great framer in New York, who's a good shipper for something from Boston to New York. I'm shipping from Europe, but I've got one thing that needs to come from Boston. Two, one of our members is doing a book on dogs and is trying to source fabulous dog photography. My favorite use of the forum in the last year, well, actually there's two. One was they were sharing Spotify playlists about photography songs, and AIPAD will be launching its Spotify channel sometime whenever my tiny team has a moment, with all of these insane playlists that our dealers had put together over, the last 30 years of songs about photography. So that was a really fun one. And then the other really incredible use of it in a more serious tone was around the LA wildfires. A lot of incredible benefits came together on the forum or were added to on the forum. And we saw different people trying to figure out how they could help. So those are the different pieces that I think speak to the breadth of what this network does for each other. And of course, the forum being one part of what AIPAD provides to its member, but obviously the membership itself is what makes that benefit worthwhile. And then the AIPAD Talks program is massive. Our reach is huge. It really has allowed us especially post-pandemic, to stay in touch with so many of our galleries across the world and to showcase what they're doing. We launched a new series called Depth of Field, which is, Martin actually just did one, where galleries are actually able to show what's going on in their space at the moment. And if they're a private dealer, they can showcase maybe a book that one of their artists is publishing or a museum show they're doing. And then the larger talks program, at least the virtual year-round one, we're really excited. We're going to be doing one with Maddie and Hans from the Rijksmuseum to show the incredible American photography show they're doing, which I really hope I'll get to go in time, but with the fair and everything, I doubt I will. And it's like so heartbreaking because so much of it is sourced not only from AIPAD shows, but from AIPAD dealers. And I just want to see this pretty incredible show. And then, yes, at the fair, the talks program on site, you know, it's always a headliner for us. But being able to grow that series, you know, we're currently 4 out of 5 talks down with a collaboration we just did with Fotografiska Global and Sophie Wright and the New York team on collecting. It's called Collecting for Everyone, specifically on introducing new audiences to photography. So this is the Fotografiska people, the Neue House people, our own subscribers, the public in New York could come and hear from our dealers and top experts. You know, Elizabeth Sherman from the ICP joined one of them. And it's been really interesting to see what the response to that has been. And so trying to plan ahead and see how we can continue to grow the AIPAD Talks program, not only virtually, but in person throughout the year is definitely something we're looking forward to doing.
Yeah. To loop into that, I mean, the interesting thing about the Talks program is that it sort of combines talks with dealers and artists, but also very much within the curatorial community and the museum community, which we have as an organization close ties to. One of the things that I wanted to say is also that we post all our virtual talks on our YouTube channel. So there's a lot of outreach after the actual talks have happened. And finally, one other thing that we are doing, which I didn't mention before, is that we have a very active Instagram channel where we do a lot of work for our members as well and for photography in general. We have newsletters that go out to a broad community of enthusiasts. So there's a lot of education going on in general out of AIPAD.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the forum and the kind of supportive network you spoke about sounds really appealing. And if I remember back when I was running my gallery in Berlin, it was only the handful of dealers that I'd become acquainted with that when I did a fair or I was going somewhere, I could call them and say, what do I do? Or how do I... Like people that had been like in the business sort of 10 years longer than me that really could sort of hold my hand through a lot of these things. But I think having the membership and then the kind of knowledge base of all of the members, that would be hugely helpful. How many members are there of AIPAD?
95 galleries.
And are they predominantly US or are they global?
So it is global. The US is our largest concentration, I guess is the right word for that, with Europe being a very close second. And then Canada, South America, Australia, Japan, and a lot of Western and some Eastern Europe countries. And yeah, it's truly a global community. The only continent we're not on is Africa, and we're working on it. We've got some galleries in Lagos, so that I'm really hoping we'll join our community soon. But
yeah, that's exciting. So from what I'd seen, there's quite a few new initiatives that are coming up in the post-COVID era. And I guess as I understand, Martin as the new president and Lydia as the executive director, you're the current management, would that be right? In the post-COVID phase of AIPAD?
Well, we work with the board, first of all. And Lydia and her team, they are basically not gallerists. They've been basically looped in by the organization. But the starting point is that we have members forming a board, which forms an executive board and chooses a president, basically. And that's my role at the moment. We also have committees staffed by members. And then for each of those, the board and those committees, there's an involvement of Lydia and her team. Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to go into the whole government thing, but it kind of works like that. You have your executive branch and you have your, basically. But let's not go there. It's a sensitive. But
yeah, for now, our branches of government work really well
Exactly.
Martin is a duly elected leader. Anyway, so the board of AIPAD is made up of 13 dealers. Martin is, of course, the president. Arnika Dawkins of her eponymous gallery in Atlanta is his vice president. And I report directly to them. So we work very closely together. We have monthly board meetings, all of those things. And pretty much what has happened, especially post-pandemic, is that AIPAD had never had an in-house staff before. It had always been something that was contracted out to maybe administrators who were handling the art fair and that they were administering the company.
That is exactly. They were doing administrative work, not necessarily hindered by any knowledge of photography or the photography market.
Yeah. Or I would say without an experience as a gallerist. I think that that's something that Martin and his predecessor, Michael Lee, and Michael Lee's predecessor, Richard Moore, and I've worked with now 3 presidents, and I would say all of them recognized that that was something that needed to change and was a big part of bringing on somebody with art world experience to this role, because all the benefits that we spoke about in terms of the talks and all of that, they benefit something. And so tailoring them and making sure that they were getting the message that our galleries needed us to get out was something that I think has been a shift and has something that I hope has been promoted maybe more heavily during this time. But the new initiatives have been every single one of them has been an answer to a challenge that we see fine art photography or contemporary or just modern or any art gallery that also shows really fantastic photo is up against right now. And that's something that post-pandemic, there are a lot of them. There were a lot of them before, but they're different now. And the pandemic gave us new tools with Zoom, look at us recording this now in 3 different time zones. It gave us a lot of tools that are allowing us to better promote a global community of galleries. And so in terms of the management of AIPAD, the day-to-day of it is run by myself, and I have a really incredible team. Irene, who's my associate director of the fair, and NJ, who works with us kind of across everything. And it's something that the 3 of us work every day to answer those challenges. And if we see something that AIPAD is not able to do at the moment, we bring it to the board and we say, this is something that we want to address. Here are some ideas. They're pretty much our focus group. It's a really incredible collaboration to go to them and say, okay, Martin has 2 spaces, right? He has 2 separate galleries, whereas another board member has a single gallery with 1 staff member. They have different priorities for their galleries, but they also recognize what each of them needs and how we might be able to best represent both of them. And so I think having that focus group kind of at our fingertips has allowed us to be really nimble in our management, and a responsive board and an encouraging board has been something that's been really helpful and is really the only reason AIPAD's been able to kind of evolve as much as it has in the last 3 years, is because the board wants us to and is pushing forward with everything that it can. So that's a little bit of like the breakdown of the management aspect of it.
So were the changes wanting to happen, or were people within the organization wanting these sort of changes to happen for a while, or did COVID really press the pause button on the fair and I guess the world really, and give people the space to think, actually, maybe we can do this when things start up again. Let's try this and do things differently.
Well, I think, to be honest, this whole transition started pre-COVID, particularly because, one of the things that we as a membership organization have acknowledged is in the past, the way it worked is we had our members much more actively doing this sort of role that Lydia is taking on with her team now. And it's a very hard ask for someone who's running a business, who's volunteering to be a part of a committee or of a board, to also essentially drive all these initiatives from front to back, in the beginning to an end. So it became harder and harder to get members to really want to get stuck in. We had our administrative people that were doing the financials and making sure everything was running smoothly, but they had no input in terms of what our community needed, in terms of the photography market and all the sort of things that come with it. So at some point in time, we negotiated as an organization to essentially ask another organization, Paris Photo in this case, to take over our fair, so that we would be less involved in that actual fair management, and so that already gave us a pause to rethink ourselves.
Yes.
And then the COVID happened. The Paris Photo collaboration never materialized because the first edition literally was planned 2 weeks after the first lockdown was started.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3 years contract that we had with Paris Photo didn't get consummated, if you like. And so we were like, okay, well, we have to get back and being a full-blown membership organization, including a fair, and that's when the major rethinkings that Lydia already mentioned, Richard Moore and Michael Lee, have been doing to bring in someone with knowledge of our field, with knowledge of the art market, to really run this organization for us with oversight from the board of consisting of members. It's been a wonderful journey. The professionality of our organization has increased many fold. The continuity of all the initiatives that we are doing, be it the fair, be it the talks, be it other things, is really making this organization work basically. So we're incredibly happy with what Lydia and her team are doing, and we're very excited that we've managed to hire her and build our organization for the future, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of the initiatives that we're doing now have been in the works for many years and were in the works even before the pandemic. But to start at the associate member initiative, to start doing, 5 talks a month versus 1 every 6 months, it takes a lot of manpower. And as Martin said, if you're running 2 businesses, you don't have a lot of time to set up all of these things. And so that shift, I think, has been the biggest one, is that now these ideas can come to fruition. And it's something that is really exciting. It's exciting to see some of these evolutions that have been in the works for AIPAD or have been desired by AIPAD for many years are happening. And I think that's also why it can seem like a lot of things are happening right now. And it's because there was a backlog. There was a lot of excitement when it was like, wait, we can do these things now.
Yeah, I can completely see how it happened as well, because when you have your group of members, you're like, we need to do this would be really good. But then that's a huge responsibility. Like, who's going to put their hand up to do that? I'll try to do it and then it doesn't work. And then, but then having like a dedicated person and a team, then you can make sure things happen.
But I think like this podcast is the perfect example of this, right? Like AIPAD has, and as you'll see, in your conversations, the amount of knowledge that is going to get thrown at you over the 7 episodes. We're talking administratively, and you're not even getting Martin about the stuff he really knows about with Japanese photography and like all the wonderful, like esoteric things that he'd much rather be talking to you about. The amount of knowledge that's going to get thrown at you from our members is insane. AIPAD should have had a podcast like the day that podcasting started, but like what it's taken between you and me to even get this off the ground, never mind NJ scheduling, the 25 people, right? So imagine all of that, but it's somebody who's also running a full-time business. So there are these things that now we can do. And I think that's really exciting for the organization, because we can put on this fair, which is what they've done and what they've done so well for many years. And we can continue to grow it and improve it and do all the things that everybody wants to do every year. But it's the auxiliary pieces that I think are making such a huge difference that our members are seeing. And I think that the public is seeing and enjoying more so than like a membership benefit.
Yeah, no, I think also the continuity, right? Because, don't forget, there is tens of members that are having roles in committees and in the board that are actually doing a lot of work, free of charge. Yeah. But it's that sort of making sure that whole process, is actually completed. And it's so easy to get off track because your gallery, we're doing a fair here, or we're doing a show there, or we're printing a book, and then before you know, oh, didn't we have a talk that we needed to organize?
Yeah,
that's so incremental to the organization, but these members are putting a lot of time into it as well.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
So, Lydia, you did mention some new initiatives, and I think one was the associate membership. So maybe you can speak a bit to that.
So this is something that's really exciting. And this was definitely in the ether many years before I ever stepped anywhere near an AIPAD office. Yes, it's an initiative for young emerging galleries, for galleries that are just starting out. AIPAD has very high standards for membership, and it includes a long time being in business, references, all these different things. And that barrier to entry was hard for some younger galleries who wanted access to the mentorship and to this community. And so we've created a program. We've just graduated our first class. So we were calling it our pilot program, but it is no longer. It's continuing. It was successful, where galleries that have been in business you only have to have been in business for 2 years. You need a reference letter from an AIPAD member and then a reference letter from another respected member of the photography community. And you can join with a lower price membership fee for 2 years. And part of that membership is you actually have to join one of our committees. So 2 of our successful graduates, the Hewlett Collection, Michael Hewlett, who you will be speaking to, joined the education committee. So he helped to do our AIPAD Talks program and put them together. And so in exchange for the lower membership and earlier admission, you put in some work, and we get the benefit of a younger perspective and the next generation to understand what their challenges are and what AIPAD needs to do to help them and to support them. And so it's a really nice kind of reciprocity program that started. And as I said, it's been successful. And so we're welcoming more members every year. Doug Marshall joined last year. I should know all of these off the top of my head, but I do not, because we're 6 weeks out from the fair. But check out our website. They're all listed there. And that was very much something that came from the board that I think they'd wanted to implement for a long time. And we're like, let's do this, and handed it off to me. And I was able to put the framework together and get out there with it.
And you mentioned you have like a special section for them at the fair. Is that right?
Yes, they have different signage so that when you're walking around, you can understand who's who.
Okay. I guess as we've already started talking about the fair, the 2025 edition of the fair is coming up at the time of recording in 6 weeks.
Time of recording, exactly. It's like next week at the time of listening, right?
Yeah, something like that. So this year is the second year that the photography show is back in the Park Avenue Armory. Is there anything that has changed since the first time you were back from last year? Because maybe we can do a quick rundown, because prior to COVID, you were in Pier 94, then there was 2 years when it didn't happen, then it was in Centre 415, and then back in the Park Avenue Armory. Why was it changing venues so much?
So we have to even go farther back. And again, I'm going to encourage your listeners to listen to the Founding of AIPAD episode, because they're going to get into all the really fun places AIPAD has been. And, this is maybe a branding issue for the company, but we refer to the fair as AIPAD, even though it's the photography show. They've kind of become synonymous. So when I say all the places AIPAD has been, I'm talking about the photography show, but there are hotels involved. There's all different things. There are different locales. But for the time period that we're really talking about, they were at the Park Avenue Armory. They wanted to expand, so they went to Pier 94, where it got much, much bigger. It was at the Pier 94 that they had intended to begin their collaboration with Perry Photo. Then, of course, the pandemic happened. The piers are not open. There's no chance of going back there. That's a whole New York political system podcast for another time that you can do without us.
Okay.
And so post-pandemic, AIPAD, the organization, really needed to take a second to figure out if it was going to relaunch the photography show, how it was going to do so. New York City does not have a lot of huge open spaces to rent for art fairs. I think anybody who's familiar with the landscape here knows that there's maybe 5 venues that you can go to. It's Javits, it's the Armory, the Metropolitan Pavilion. And so there were very few, and none of them really fit what AIPAD was going to do at that time. So the board during COVID, this is before my time, I was brought in once they'd already found this venue, found a brand new space, Center 415, which was smack in the middle of Manhattan. The location could not be better. It was on Fifth Avenue. It was really incredible. And it was much smaller, and it allowed the photography show to soft launch again, to see if the demand was still there for a photography fair in New York, for specifically this kind of photo fair. And it was. And so we did 2 years there, but the whole time we knew that this wasn't the long-term home of the photography show. It wasn't big enough. We could only have about 44 galleries there. And the Park Avenue Armory has always been considered the golden years of the photography show. And so getting back there was a massive priority for the board and for our team. And so we'd been working on that for quite a bit, and very happily to have signed a multi-year lease with them. And last year was our first year back. And so that's the brief history of the roller coasters that were this. And that all sounds very simple and easy. And let's just say it was. Martin and I can remember our nightmares at another time. So last year we had our grand relaunch. It was gorgeous. It was fantastic. We broke all of AIPAD's attendance records from the times when it was at the Armory beforehand.
Oh, amazing.
So this year we've redesigned the floor plan because we had some traffic issues going from a publisher's room to the drill hall, and it just wasn't as smooth as it could have been. And so we've actually brought our photo book publishers and partners onto the show floor. They are now in their own sector. So you come into the fair, you're going to walk right into the drill hall. You're going to see the main gallery sector. You're going to see a lot of new kind of cool, exciting small exhibitions. Our lead cultural partner, Muse's exhibition, will be there. And then you'll see the publishers and photo book and some of our organizational partners are all within the big, great room that everyone knows and loves. And then our AIPAD Talks program, we're really excited, has moved into the Veterans Room, the famous Tiffany room at the Armory, to really showcase the incredible speakers we have in, I think, probably one of the most beautiful, if not probably the most beautiful room on the Upper East Side. It's just absolutely spectacular. So yeah, a lot of exciting new things. We're thrilled to welcome Muse back, but we're also welcoming Aperture's Portfolio Prize finalists. All 5 of them will be exhibited at the fair, which is going to be a really great way to encourage emerging photographers in a way that really only AIPAD can, and to give them the audience of art dealers and this global community that, you know, maybe some would want to be represented by. And so I think that'll be really exciting. And I think the floor is going to feel incredibly dynamic this year. And we've ironed out some of the kinks of our move home.
So you mentioned the redesign of the floor plan and everything for the 2025 edition. Is there anything in particular you're looking forward to in this year's edition of the fair?
I'm really excited to have the publishers on the floor. I think that that's like a really great energy, and photo books are so integral to bringing new audiences into the fine art photography world. And this is maybe like a great full circle for this episode. You know, I bought a photo book long before I bought a photograph. And it's something that it's a great way to bring in collectors who maybe can't collect yet, right? This is the thing. Photography is such an incredible, accessible, both technologically, but also at a price point. And photo book is even more so. And so I'm really excited about that. I think the Aperture partnership is also one, you know, we've worked with them every year, but being able to showcase real, truly emerging photographers is not something I would say AIPAD has been known for in the past. Mm-hmm. And I think is really indicative of where we are now and all of the new initiatives. Yeah, to be able to show 5 photographers that aren't represented and that maybe we could have some small part in facilitating that process are 2 things. And I always look forward to what our exhibitors bring. I mean, the breadth is insane. There's no other way to say it. There's no other way to say it.
AIPAD used to be known very much for sort of classic and 19th century photography, and it's grown.
That's how I knew it.
It's really evolved from there. So I think that what Lydia is saying is really a testament to what AIPAD has become. That we can now show from emerging to from 19th century to emerging photography in one room. So the amount of the new members that have been joining AIPAD are mainly contemporary photography dealers. So we still have a big core of classic and 19th century photography. So we with this addition of the Aperture people is really making the whole of the photography market and world accessible in one fair, basically, which is very, very interesting. And in Paris they're doing similar things. But apart from what Paris is doing, what we are doing, I don't think you see anything like that in the photography market.
No, I mean, it's really, you can walk into AIPAD and see the entire history of photography, from the first plates to things that were taken yesterday and that are using AI, using all of these different new technologies. And I think it's also a really great way to educate the public about the technological changes in photography and kind of how incredible that's been. All of that is under this one gorgeous roof at the Armory.
Yeah, I think it's also important as well, just for ushering in new generations of collectors and photography enthusiasts, that they can see not just where photography is now, but where it came from.
And it's, something to call out Martin a bit and our YouTube channel. The artist that we were speaking to on the Depth of Field talk, right, is looking at a historic process, right, is using a historic process to create contemporary work. And I think that's like something that's so beautiful and so true of so much of photography. It often looks back in terms of the process and improves them, and in a way that technology just does in general also.
Yeah. No, I think that's also very interesting, that you can see so many different techniques under one roof, basically. Yeah. And the artist that Lydia is talking about, actually, he combined AI and a historical photography process. So it's really, it's really we don't shy away from anything in that. We embrace that. I think a lot of people are concerned about AI and what it means for them, for the world, for the art world, or whatever. But there's the process, the technology, but there's also the way you use it, basically, and that's the interesting thing about it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think AI has been a big topic for the last 2 years now, but definitely because the technology is almost at a point now where some AI images are indistinguishable from actual photographs, that it's almost pushing photography in a new direction. And I think when I spoke with Boris Eldakson a while ago, or when I saw him in Paris, actually, he's saying that AI is essentially going to do to photography what photography did to painting, and it'll force photography to really reinvent itself and to think and act in a different way. And right. I mean, I guess we'll see at the fair, but I think in the last few years in general, we're seeing like a return to traditional methods and to the kind of more materiality of photography, and how photography will then start doing things that AI isn't able to do, and people will kind of lean more into that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, and that could be its own podcast episode, but we just did this whole talk about mixed media photography and ways that artists are trying to kind of make photography unique and unique works that maybe aren't editioned, and to really show the artist intervention in them. And so you have to wonder kind of how all of that interacts with AI, and is that a reaction? Is AI a reaction to the other, and goes back and forth theoretically.
I think it was always already there, but I think AI is almost a catalyst, to really, really speed up that process. I think the sense of urgency amongst artists is there to really sort of counter this whole image culture that you can create with AI, and really use it as well. So it's massively interesting what is going on in that field.
Absolutely. Before we open up a new discussion,
yes, let's do another hour, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any closing notes or comments or anything we've not covered?
I would just say I'm really excited this year to see AIPAD on new channels like yours. With all of this talk of kind of how AIPAD is evolving, the new platforms are definitely one of them. And so our partnership with Fotografiska has been phenomenal, but I'm excited to continue kind of these new collaborations. And I think that's really indicative of what the fair will be this year. There's a definite spotlight on education, on learning about who our galleries are and what they're showing and what they're doing and what their artists are conveying in a time when media and just life can be a bit of a visual onslaught. What can photography say about that? And I think AIPAD has an important place in that. And I hope people will come to the fair and see some really incredible artist work that are trying to answer that question and have been trying to answer that question for hundreds of years.
This episode is brought to you by AIPAD and the Photography Show. AIPAD represents fine art photography galleries around the world and is proud to present the 2025 edition of its flagship event, the Photography Show. The fair will showcase photography from the earliest processes to cutting-edge contemporary work that pushes the boundaries of the medium. From April 23 until 27 at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City, go to www.aipad.com/show for more information and to plan your visit. Check the show notes for links to the AIPAD website and social media presence, as well as details about each of today's guests. In the next episode of the series, I'll be joined by Lee Marks, Robert Klein, Stephen Bolger, and Richard Moore, who together represent 30 years of AIPAD presidency and look back on the history of the association from the very beginning in the late 70s. If you want to be the first to hear new episodes, then please subscribe to Subtext Discourse Art World podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone else interested in the overlap of photography and the art world, please send them a link to the show. Podcasting is obviously a broadcast medium, however I'm happy for listeners to reach out. You're welcome to follow me on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, LinkedIn at Michael Dooney. Otherwise, you can also go to my website, www.michaeldooney.net. There you'll also find the International Photo Festival database I put together, as well as my webinar for photographers and artists working in lens-based media to better understand the art market and get their work into galleries. I think that's everything. Thanks again for tuning in. My name's Michael Dooney, and you've been listening to Subtext and Discourse.